Hey world, long time no see, and you're very welcome back to Nerdy Keith. So a topic I've never really discussed on the internet, at least not on YouTube, is my passion for Star Trek. So Trek Spire is a new segment I'm doing on my channel, which is composed of a series of videos where I discuss why Star Trek is important to me and why I think it is still important to this day. So let's start off with what Star Trek means to me. Primarily, Star Trek is based upon a group of scientists known as Starfleet, maintained by the galactic government, the Federation of Planets. Most of their peaceful missions are set in space and other planets. Space is the final frontier. Their continuing mission is to seek out new life and new civilizations and to boldly go where no one has gone before. But make no mistake, Star Trek isn't all about cool gadgets or powerful phasers or very fast starships traveling at warp speed. It is about showing us what humanity could become several hundred years from now. That we could become not only a more enlightened race, but we could become the gold standard of that. Right from the get-go, Star Trek has always been about challenging the opposition of social justice and about making social commentary based on what was occurring at the time. Take the original series, for example. It was originally aired in the 1960s. Its pilot episode, which was entitled The Cage, featured a female first officer. Now put that into the cultural context of the 1960s and take into consideration the amount or rather lack of rights that women had during the 60s. Then of course we have the Russian navigator, Ensign Chekhov. Quite a bold move to make, considering that this was still a time during the height of the Cold War and Russians were still viewed as the enemy of the United States. And then we have Lieutenant Uhura, another female, African American, and the communications officer. Another very bold move, considering that during the 1960s most black women on television typically played roles as a maid or servant. So having a female African American playing a senior bridge officer on a starship during the 1960s was a pretty big deal. Last but by no means least, we have Lieutenant Sulu, the ship's helmsman, who was of course Japanese, and this too was considered to be very groundbreaking at the time. The Japanese were a recently defeated enemy in World War II, and the United States was just coming to terms with how they had treated their Japanese citizens. Many people don't realize this, but George Takei himself was not only a victim of racism, but he and his family during that time were put into an internment camp. Of course, apart from having diverse casts, Star Trek continued to promote social justice, and it was very apparent in the original series that racial issues were very much the focus point, which are very important issues, and this was very apparent in TOS's Season 3 in an episode titled Let That Be Your Battlefield. This episode featured two people, both from the same alien world, both with different cultures. Both of their skin colors was half black and half white, but on opposite sides of their faces. This episode very truthfully shows the very same struggles humanity endures with our racial conflicts. It shows us how easy we are to judge, to stereotype, to hold bias of those of different races and cultures. As other Star Trek spin-offs began to roll out, we continued to see even more social commentary on racism, to how the Klingons, the Cardassians, and the Bajorans are viewed amongst themselves and other species. Another honorable mention which illustrates the corruption of racism was featured quite a few times on Star Trek Voyager in regards to how holograms who present themselves as humanoids and how they are treated in contrast with organics. One of such episodes that featured this theme was an episode called Author from Star Trek Voyager's 7th season. In this episode, the Doctor's very personhood is questioned, something that humanity is guilty of doing so many many times throughout our history. One example of this is how the Nazis treated the Jews. Star Trek also attempted to present a positive image on gender equality, from having a female chief of medicine on Star Trek's The Next Generation, to once again having a female first officer on Deep Space Nine, to not only having a female chief engineer, but also having the very first female captain to ever be cast as a main character in a Star Trek series in Voyager. That social commentary has yet been extended again in Star Trek Discovery, or Disco as some like to call it. This is the very first series in Star Trek to ever feature main characters who are openly gay. The show illustrates that they deal with very similar complex issues just as a heterosexual couple would. Or a heterosexual character would, for that matter. So when I watch Star Trek, I really do boldly go where I've never gone before. And I'm not talking about the starships. I'm not even talking about the strange new worlds. I'm not even talking about the mirror universe. I'm talking about the journey of how much better humanity can be. And I know some people like to criticize Star Trek by saying it's become too PC or too SJW and so forth. But I say Star Trek is exactly as it should be, and I'll even go as far as to say that it is more in line with what Gene Roddenberry intended now more than ever. So until next time, everyone, keep boldly going, live long and prosper, and don't forget, nerds rule the world. Bye guys.